Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, and so much love to each and every one of you. You're all so special to me, and I hope you're doing incredibly well. And isn't it getting so exciting with the story I don't know about you, but I'm very excited because we've got to a part where we're wondering whether the body could possibly belong to Eliza. Could this be Eliza's body, the girl that has gone missing? Or is it somebody else's body? And we're going to find out about that, and it's very exciting. So before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And if you haven't heard part 1, part 2, part 3 and part 4, click on the description because you do not want to miss out. This is a fabulously amazing story. So let's continue, shall we?
"Look at this," said Big Bear. "Now this is extraordinary. I've never seen anything like this before. I think the man who phoned you and who buried the corpse on our land must have come back to lay stones over the grave site. I mean, he must have had some kind of attachment to the deceased. He wanted to make the place look special. What a very peculiar thing to do. Most odd. I mean, talk about drawing attention to the grave. You're trying to conceal a body, and then you bring everybody's attention to it. It's going to be quite a job to move some of those rocks, let me tell you."
After much exhausted huffing and puffing, Big Bear removed the rocks from the gravesite, and he began to dig up the grave. The soil was loose, but it was not an easy job by any manner of means. The grave had been dug deep, and Big Bear worked up quite a sweat, and soon he'd hit pay dirt. Prim closed her eyes tightly, waiting for her husband to affirm her very worst fears.
"I'm going to take a look, Prim. The body is wrapped up in an eiderdown, so brace yourself, because this might not be pretty. But you did ask for me to do this."
"I need to know if it's her," said Prim. "You saw her picture on the news. 5'5", pale skin, 120 pounds, brown hair, green eyes. Check if it's her." Big Bear was taking his time, and she heard him let out an audible gasp, and Prim opened up her eyes wide. "Oh, my God!" She put her hands on her mouth. "It is her! It is her! Oh, my God, what are we going to do?" she said, her mouth dropping open wide.
"It's not her," said Big Bear. "The body has been dead for many years. All that I have here, buried beneath the folds of this eiderdown, are a bag of bones and a human skull."
"What?" said Prim, rushing over to the grave to observe what Big Bear was looking at. All of a sudden a huge figure stepped through the trees, and the colour drained from Big Bear's face, as a huge Herculean-sized male Bigfoot had made his presence known. Big Bear wanted to scream. He'd never seen such a terrifying, intimidating creature in all of his life. He wanted to run away. He really did, but he could not. It was like his legs had crumbled beneath him and were incapable of supporting his weight or even moving his body, that seemed uncooperative, as the signal in his brain persuading him to run seemed to be stalling and stuttering, like a broken-down old car engine that refuses to ignite or even get started. This imposing, powerful male Bigfoot had brought the fear of God steamrolling into every single cell of his body, like a fast-moving freight train. Big Bear was so intimidated by this powerful Bigfoot. He was a big man himself, but he found himself feeling conspicuously small. He wanted to tell Prim to run as fast as she could, get back to the farmhouse, but his mouth was as dry and scratchy as sandpaper, and the only thing that came out of his throat was a frightened whimpering sound, like that of a terrified dog. Big Bear was absolutely certain that this male Bigfoot was going to attack the both of them. And then something rather bizarre happened. His wife Prim spoke to him in a calm voice, as if the encounter with this huge male Bigfoot was like buying an ice cream from a street vendor. "It's all right, Big Bear. He's not going to hurt us." Big Bear was too afraid to give the Bigfoot any eye contact. He knew when you faced an apex predator, you did not challenge it. But his wife's calm demeanour made him look up coyly at the creature, and he found himself caught up in the gaze of the Bigfoot's stare. He heard the very clear, articulate words in his head.
Do not move this body. She wants to rest in this place. She likes it here."
Big Bear was absolutely astonished. His mouth dropped wide open. He knew that this male Bigfoot had communicated with him telepathically. How did that happen? He just stood there, confounded, as the Bigfoot gracefully sashayed towards the gravesite, replacing the bones and the eiderdown, covering them up neatly and putting them back in the earth. The Bigfoot began to fill up the grave with soil, while Big Bear and Prim just watched him, caught up in the moment, like a seed on the wind. Big Bear's body loosened like a frozen pork chop, suddenly thawing. He was no longer afraid. The moment he looked into the Bigfoot's eyes, he knew that this idiosyncratic, outlandish creature would certainly not harm them. But he still could not move a muscle, as fear had been overtaken by bewilderment and an insatiable curiosity. He kept rubbing his eyes, as if trying to persuade himself that this was no dream. The Bigfoot began arranging the large stones back around the grave, and then he brushed some of the dirt off his hands, wiping them against his long dark hair. He looked from both Prim to Big Bear, with an earnest expression on his face, and then to their amazement he spoke with a silver tongue, as intelligible words floated out of his mouth. Prim was immediately struck by how human the Bigfoot's face was, and when he spoke, his words sounded like rushing waters, powerful, authoritative, all-knowing, rooted in ancient origins, but miraculously downloaded into their heads in English. How did that work? Even those apps online that can translate language for you did not work with the staggering efficiency, and they would never be able to translate a language like this. Akilatakwa, olatika sono, hibani zalakwa. You must not move this precious beloved soul. This is where she would like to remain, and I think it wise to listen to a soul's wishes, do you not? She loves this oak tree with the gnarled boughs. She hates formal burial plots. Leave her be." And with that he turned around, swinging his overlong arms, and floated away through the woods, his movements so graceful. For a brief second the Bigfoot did glance back over his shoulders at the couple, and Prim lifted up her hand in response, to wave at the Bigfoot, and he waved back at her, and Prim began to giggle. She felt happy to have enjoyed an up-close and personal encounter with such a spectacular creature, although she considered him more of a man than a beast. For a while Big Bear could not move, even when Prim tried to encourage him to leave the grove. "Did that happen?" he asked. "Am I dreaming? Did a Bigfoot just speak to us? Tell us to leave the bones alone?" "He did," said Prim. "But let's get back to the house, Big Bear. I've something important to tell you, but it will keep." Bigfoot reluctantly took her hand, as she guided him away through the trees, on a moonless night, where only the light of their torches abruptly broke through the cloying blanket of darkness, and illuminated their way back to the Painted Lady. "You did hear, Prim, what the Bigfoot told us. We need to leave the grave site undisturbed. He told us that the spirit of the deceased body wants to remain under that oak tree. How could he possibly even know a thing like that? Does he communicate with the dead or something?" "I wouldn't be surprised if he does," said Prim. "I think that Bigfoot is special. He seems to know things. Maybe he can see through dimensions and can see into the spirit world. They say animals like dogs and cats can actually see spirits, and I believe they can." Big Bear squeezed his wife's hand. "What a hell of a night, Prim," he said, looking at his wife tenderly, his intrigued eyes shining brightly. "I'm so relieved that it was not the body of Eliza Kennington." Prim nodded her head in agreement. "I'm so glad we dug up the grave. We found out exactly what is buried on our land, but we have no idea who the corpse belongs to, because it's a mysterious bag of bones. The Bigfoot said it was female, but we need to get answers." As the couple reached the Painted Lady, a whole lot of moths were circulating around the outside light, and on the kitchen mantel Smudge was licking his chops, as if he'd thoroughly enjoyed a delicious rat dinner that he'd clearly fully devoured. He looked like an adorable murderer, if you can get one. Prim shuddered as she thought about the macabre remains of the rat that would welcome her when she entered the house. She hoped that they were under the kitchen table, and not under her bed. Smudge ate his quarry always like a pretzel. They could hear Heathcliff barking away excitedly in the house, and once they opened the door, he flew out, almost knocking Prim over, who was still hobbling rather precariously on her leg, but thankfully the pain in her ankle had subsided. "Careful, Heathcliff! Calm down, boy!" she told her dog. Soon she and Big Bear were drinking hot cups of coffee in the kitchen. Not exactly a wise choice, given they both would have liked to go to bed, but Prim had no hot chocolate in the house, and both Big Bear and Prim were now wide awake after their nightly adventure in the grove. It almost seemed as if sleep had eluded them. Big Bear's mind was a whirl, with a kaleidoscope of questions as who the mysterious body on their land belonged to, and given its age, he doubted that some ominous drug cartel had requested permission to bury ancient remains on their property.
"This is the weirdest night I've ever had," said Big Bear, letting out a low whistle. "I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't experienced it for myself. And you know what, Prim? I really liked that Bigfoot. What a gentle soul! When I saw him, Prim, I thought it was over Cordovas for us. I'm not going to kid. He was an intimidating fellow. But boy, what a nice man! I mean, so nice. Better than some people I meet in my daily life. I would go so far as to say that Bigfoot was a cool dude, like someone I'd happily hang around with."
"That's not going to happen, Big Bear," chuckled Prim. "Bigfoots are elusive by nature. They're not exactly social, but I do agree. He's more man than beast, that's for sure."
"You are right, Prim. I can't possibly call the Bigfoot a creature. That would almost be insulting, because he was a hairy man, built like a powerful giant. But look at my fingers," he said, clutching his hands tightly. "They're still trembling. You see, I'm not used to being the one being towered over. The people I meet, I usually tower over them. So it's very weird having someone towering over me."
Prim began tapping her mug of coffee reflectively. "As I was telling you, Big Bear, I'm heartily relieved that the grave did not belong to Eliza, but it does belong to someone else. And I hate to tell you, Big Bear, but I know who buried the body on our land, and we're going to have to confront him about it, because I need answers, and I need them now. We've established the body does not belong to Eliza, but we don't know who it is that it belongs to. I know I'm sounding like Nancy Drew, but I can't help it."
"How could you possibly know who buried the body on our land?" said Big Bear,
looking at his wife quizzically. "It was Ben Lorrington," said Prim. "He buried the body on our property, and you know how I know, Big Bear? Because the body was wrapped up in one of Violet's quilts. She never sold those quilts to anyone, nor did she give them away. So let me tell you, he buried the body on our land. Remember how he offered to help us financially? Ben Lorrington's got money, and $300,000 is not a big deal to him. He was the one who phoned us, but I won't rest until I know who the remains belong to, and why Ben Lorrington chose to bury them on our property. And I hope that our neighbour is not a murderer, Big Bear, but we'll soon find out." Big Bear grimaced at the startling revelation, but now, like his wife, he felt it was significant that they found out who the deceased corpse actually belonged to. Prim woke up the following morning to the nudging of her husband, who sounded excited. He began to play the news on his cell phone.
"Listen to this, Prim."
The news anchor was reporting on the abduction of Eliza Kennington, and it was good news indeed. Eliza Kennington had been found safe and well. She managed to escape her abductor, a man called Barker Brutus, who had taken her captive at his home, leaving her tied up, and in an unused outbuilding on the property. He was refusing to give her drink and food until she became cooperative, but Eliza was spitting at him like a wild, untamed animal. Eliza was discovered by a farmhand on the property, who had been alerted to a strange whimpering sound that he'd heard, believing it to be an injured animal that needed his help. He was astounded to find the young girl tied up in the barn with powerful chains. He had worked for Barker Brutus for over 3 years, and had never felt remotely comfortable about the man.
"I saw him kicking his dog," said the farmhand, "so I took the dog away from him, kept him to myself. The dog's a good animal. I call her Lassie. She's devoted to me. I told Barker that Lassie had been eaten by a coyote. He didn't care at all. I knew he was not a good person. I cannot stand cruelty to animals of any kind."
The authorities were alerted, and Barker Brutus had been arrested. When he was questioned by police, he said he'd intended to keep Eliza as a sex slave, as he was tired of spending so much money on hookers. He said if Eliza did not settle down, he'd have killed her without a doubt. Barker's ex-wife, who no longer lives on the property, described her husband as a monster with psychopathic tendencies, and was not remotely surprised as to what her husband had actually done.
"The man's an animal," she said. "I hope they lock him up and throw away the key, and he never sees the light of day again. During our marriage he beat me up, but I was far too scared to call the authorities, because I knew he would kill me. I've been in hiding from that man for a very long time, you know."
The news anchor returned her attention to the camera. "Eliza is still in shock, is currently receiving trauma counselling, but has been reunited with her delighted parents. It is believed Barker held Eliza at gunpoint, forcing her into his truck. He has admitted to the police that he had planned this abduction 3 weeks in advance, chosen Eliza as his victim, believing she would be compliant, given her gentle nature and willingness to please. But it would seem the feisty teenager gave up more of a fight than he'd bargained for." "That's incredible," said Prim, looking heartily relieved, as she climbed out of bed. "Normally if I hear about a case like this on the news, I feel sad that someone has gone missing. But this time I felt so much connection to Eliza, as I was so sure it was her body on our property, and that's why I feel personally involved with her. I'm just so amazed she's alive. Thank God for that farmhand." It was later in the morning that Prim and Big Bear returned to Ben Lorrington's property, and he looked surprised to see them as he opened up the door.
"Hello there. I hope you're dropping around for some coffee," he said. "The place is still a dreadful mess, boxes everywhere, but I'm finally managing to get everything sorted out. I dropped off a lot of Violet's old clothes at a charity shop. I think they were quite pleased to get in such a large haul of clothes. Please do come in, but mind the boxes, will you? I don't want you to trip over anything."
Big Bear and Prim meandered around tons of boxes spread out across Ben's living room, and before long they were seated around the kitchen table, with mugs of coffee.
"So," said Ben, "why do I get this feeling that this is not just a social call?"
Prim looked up at Ben Lorrington and said gingerly, "Ben, we know you buried a body on our land. We need to know why." Ben's face dropped, and his eyes were clouded with sadness.
"Before I tell you what happened, promise me you won't judge Violet harshly. My wife Prim is the beautiful person you knew as a little girl."
Prim did not answer, but Big Bear nodded.
"I know your Violet was a good woman, Ben, but please tell us why you came to bury a body on our land, and paid us for the privilege."
Ben began mopping his brow, as it had broken out into beads of sweat.
"It happened about 15 years ago. Me and Violet were returning home from a party at my brother's house. But my brother has a garrulous wife. She doesn't stop jabbering away. Sometimes I think he just switches off and nods at his wife, not listening to a word she has to say, and I don't blame him for that. She doesn't half go on and on and on. I remember we were getting ready to leave, and I was glad about that. I couldn't wait to get home. But we stood in their doorway, and just as we were about to make our way back to the car to say our final farewells, my brother's wife remembers another thing she forgot to tell us about. And so for about 45 minutes we stood in the freezing cold weather, listening to her yabbering away. My wife Violet was driving. She didn't drink alcohol that evening. She was on medication from the doctor. Finally we said our farewells, and I will admit I don't think I ever felt so grateful to get back in the car. I was practically begging my wife to put her foot down on the accelerator and get out of there.
"My God, Ben, I thought we'd never get away," said Violet. "It was so freezing standing in the doorway. We must have been there for about 45 minutes or so. Look at my fingers, they're like ice blocks. Don't get me wrong, I love your brother's wife very much, but she'd make a parrot seem mute. Does she ever stop to draw breath, even for a moment?"
"I don't know how my brother copes with a woman like her," I agreed.
"Maybe it's like having a television blaring in the background. Finally you get used to it. My goodness, is that the time?" said Violet, looking at the clock. "It's 12 o'clock at night already."
My wife leaned forward to put on some music. It was a battle driving down some of those back sequestered roads. Everything was blanketed in darkness, and to boot it was a moonless night. Violet never enjoyed driving at night. It just wasn't her thing. But I had drunk far too much wine that evening, so we thought it was better that Violet drove. But then something happened. A body just bounced against our windscreen. Neither of us saw the girl in the road, but there she was, and we heard the ominous thud that you do when you've run something over. We knew it wasn't a deer. We saw the body. We observed the clothes. It happened so fast. 1 minute she was driving along, the next minute thump. And don't forget this is late at night, when you don't expect someone to be walking in the middle of the road. Me and Violet never saw anything until it was too late. Violet could not get out of the car. She had frozen to the spot. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel for dear life. Her face was as pale as a piece of paper, and she was trembling all over. I've never seen her look so frightened in all my life. She was saying, "What have I done? What have I done? What have I done?" I had to lean over to switch off the ignition for her, putting the car in park. I climbed cautiously out of the car to discover a young woman lying in the middle of the road. She was dead, smelled very strongly of alcohol on her breath. She had an empty bottle of rum in her purse, along with her ID and stuff like that. She looked like a doll on the road. There was a pool of blood seeping out of her head. Let me tell you, on that day 2 women died. The young lady Mary Greenberg, who was 25 years of age, and my wife. But Violet died very slowly from that day forwards, as if a light in her head had gone out, and the guilt ate away at her like a festering cancer, until it metastasized and finally took her. I know it was an accident, but my wife could never forgive herself for what happened that night. I think the young lady was walking in the middle of the road because she was so drunk, but we never saw her. I told Violet we should call the police at once, that I would say I was behind the wheel of the car, because as a man, I wanted to naturally protect my wife, take all the heat from her. You do what you have to do to protect your wife. But she would not hear of it, and in the end we agreed to bury the young lady on our land, somewhere very pretty. Of course, we never expected to get away with it, but there were no missing persons cases reported on the television, nothing about this mysterious young woman, which was astounding to us. No police seemed to investigate the situation. No one came to our door asking questions. We knew who the young lady was because of her ID. So my wife went to track the family down, to see if the mother was very distraught about her daughter, wondering what had become of her. But that woman was not remotely interested in her daughter. The family lived in a dilapidated house on the edge of town, with a leak in the roof and a gate falling off its hinges. But it was also very untidy and filthy. Violet had to walk over toys in the path just to get to the front door. Mary Greenberg's mother had about 5 kids running around the place, playing games together, all eyeing her curiously. They were scruffy little things, very unkempt. Violet knocked on the door, and a buxom but brassy-looking woman opened it. She had curlers in her hair, a cigarette dangling out of her mouth. She snapped at Violet, eyeing her suspiciously with piercing brown eyes, and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" Violet asked her if she could come in for a moment. The woman was very annoyed. "You better make it quick," she said. "Can't you see I'm a busy lady?" Violet was led into this dark corridor in a very grubby-looking sitting room. The woman gestured for her to take a seat on an old settee that was pretty threadbare, covered in cat's hairs, I think it was. The woman sat down on the opposite chair to my wife. She took a puff of her cigarette and then extinguished it in a huge tray, the size of a round bowl, just full of old cigarette stubs. "Why did you come here? What do you want?" she asked again.
"It's your daughter Mary," said Violet.
"What about her? I haven't heard from her for years. I thought by now she'd be lying dead in a ditch. That's what the stupid cow deserves."
"Why do you say that?" asked Violet. "Don't you care about your daughter?"
"What Mary gets up to is none of my business. She's old enough to make her own decisions. She was always drinking too much. A chip of her father's block she was. Can't you see, I've got 5 young ones to take care of. I had these with my second husband. 3 left home long time ago. But Mary never left. Never ever helped me with the kids. Was always drinking far too much. When she didn't come home a few years back, I thought she'd either just shacked up with someone, drunk herself into an early grave. So why did you come here? You're not from the police, are you? Because I have nothing to do with whatever Mary's done."
"Oh, no, absolutely not. I can assure you I am not the police. I just wanted to find out where Mary was. I haven't seen her for a long time. I'm an old friend, you see."
"Good luck with that. You ain't going to find her here. I haven't spoken to my other 2 kids and Mary for years, and good riddance to bad rubbish. Once they left home, they didn't even want to know me."
"What about Mary's father? Where is he?" my wife asked Mary's mother.
"Oh, you want to know about that old codger? Oh, he was a loser. Loser. Why do you think I left him all those years ago? Sorry man he was, always drinking. He got cirrhosis of the liver years back. Miserable codger he was. Drank himself into an early grave, he did. Mind you, my doctor says if I don't stop smoking like a chimney, I'll end up down the same ugly path. My mother died at 92, you know. Smoked every day of her life like I did. Lost her voice like me. But what do those doctors really know? My wife left the premises, realizing that Mary's mother did not care if her own daughter was alive or dead. And so in a way we decided she was safe with us on the land, resting in peace. But we left a duffel bag containing $200,000 for Mary's mother. But do you know, even though she bought herself a nice car, she never did a thing to improve the house or better her children's lives. That woman only cared about herself. Violet believed if she told her about her daughter's fortuitous death on the road, she'd have said something like, "I don't give a toss what happened to my daughter. She never gave a toss about me."
"But I don't understand why you moved Mary's body," asked Prim, "and buried her on our land."
"Well, I knew I was leaving this property. I'd put it up for sale. Who knows what kind of renovations are going to occur on this land? I wanted to find a safe place for Mary Greenberg to rest in peace. I chose the 2 of you. Believe it or not, it was a very big compliment. I knew you were both made of tough stuff. I also knew you needed money. It seemed like a win-win situation to me. But something bizarre happened when I arrived on your property to bury the bones. Of course, I don't expect you to believe a word of what I'm about to tell you, but I'm looking forward to sharing my story with you nevertheless. I walked across your property, deciding whereabouts it was I was going to bury the body. I'm a Libra. I'm pretty bad at making decisions like that. If Violet were alive, she would make the decision on my behalf. So I was struggling to find a suitable spot to bury the bones. That was when I heard this whistling sound. I looked up to see this Bigfoot walking towards me, and he was beckoning me. Let me tell you, I've never been so startled or scared in all my life. But then I heard the words in my head. Don't be afraid of me. I know I look formidable, but I'm a nice dude, really. I'll show you where she wants to be buried. So I found myself following the Bigfoot, and an incredible peace came over me, as I knew that this was just a hairy man, much like myself, but big and hairy. I followed the Bigfoot towards a clearing in the trees. He pointed to a specific spot under an oak tree, and told me that she likes it here. She likes the oak tree. I began to dig it up with my spade, but the Bigfoot took the spade from me, throwing it across the ground as if it was a useless tool, and then using a large tree stump began to lift up the ground, and he dug very deep, deeper than I had intended to go. He put the bones in the ground for me, and replaced the soil on them, and he did it so quickly, and looked up at me and said, She's safe here, and she wants you to know that she understands it was an accident. She's at peace, and she's also here with your wife. Your wife is smiling at you. Your wife says she's happy, and she tells me to tell you Booba. When the Bigfoot said she said Booba, I couldn't believe it, because that's my wife's special nickname for me, and nobody knows that. The Bigfoot turned to me and said, Thank you for the apples that I've enjoyed over the years. I'm very grateful you planted that grove. I hope I didn't take too many of them, but I've got a terrible sweet tooth. Just so you know, I'll keep an eye on the grave. And he patted me on the back as if I was a good old friend of his, and just glided away. He came back and said, Oh, if you're leaving, please tell the new owners to keep the orchard. I'll try not to take too many apples. I said I didn't believe the orchard was going anywhere, which pleased the Bigfoot greatly. I do know that the architect is very keen on the orchard, wants to grow still more trees.
That's an incredible story, said Prim, staring at Ben incredulously. But it does sound from what you're saying that Mary Greenberg's tragic death was an accident. If she was walking home blind drunk at the dead of night, and it was dark, it would have been difficult to see her. I can't imagine what it must have been like for poor Violet, blaming herself for what had happened, when it was just an accident.
Well, we never did see Mary on the road. One minute we were driving down that road, the next thing there's a thump. That's how fast it was. And we see the body on the windscreen. There were shards everywhere, but I discreetly fixed the truck myself. The question is, what do you intend to do about it? Are you going to go to the police? I'm an old man now. It really doesn't matter what you decide.
Ben, I think the decision is out of our hands, don't you? You told us the male Bigfoot told you that Mary wanted to be buried under the oak tree. So that's what she wants, and that's what she's going to get. We need to respect her wishes. Besides, it sounds like her own family never cared about what happened to her. So no one is grieving her loss, which is really sad. But we'll look after her and love her in death, even though she wasn't loved or appreciated in life by the sounds of things.
So you believe my story about the Bigfoot? Asked Ben.
Yes, I do. Me and Big Bear met the Bigfoot. He pretty much told us the same thing. So it affirms to me that Mary wants to remain buried on our land. It's so tragic that her mother doesn't care about her. She never even reported her daughter missing. It was like nobody bothered about her. Very sad. Some people don't deserve to be mothers, if you ask me. 5 years later, Prim's account. Life was so good living in the Painted Lady, the spectacular pink house my great-uncle had bequeathed me when I was only 18 years old. By all accounts, ever since I first laid eyes on the sumptuously cosy farmhouse, with its warm, welcoming, all-enveloping energy, I knew that this was where I belonged. But when we were hit by an all-consuming tsunami of financial problems that threatened to bury our lives like that ancient city Atlantis, I saw no hope in salvation until we received that mysterious phone call offering to pay us $300,000 in order to bury a dead body on our land. It was close to impossible to turn that kind of tempting offer away. It would be tantamount to a drowning man waving away the chance of rescue from a passing motorboat. And who does that? When I uncovered the mysterious truth about the young girl, Mary Greenberg, who tragically lost her life on one dark, lonely night when she met with a fortuitous end, when she was hit by Violet Lorrington's car, I knew it had been a tragic accident, and that the young girl had been at the wrong place at the wrong time, and was more than likely drunk. It was my encounter with the Bigfoot who made it clear to me that he could see into the spiritual realm, and assured me that Mary Greenberg wanted her remains to remain under the old oak tree on our land, which I hasten to say is one of the most magnificent oak trees I have ever beheld, and if given a choice, I would also be buried there. Thanks to Ben Lorrington's money, we were able to pay off my mother's medical bills and some of our mortgage. We gave my husband's parents $50,000, and the money made a huge difference to their lives. And there is no greater feeling in the entire world than helping people out and making their lives significantly better. It sure as hell beats buying more stuff for yourself when you can make a difference in somebody else's life. The painted lady, I'm glad to tell you, received a brand new coat of pink paint and was looking more beautiful than ever, and my children thoroughly enjoyed the benefits of being raised on Great Uncle Walter's property. I knew that everything was meant to be, and that the Bigfoot I'd seen through the kitchen window telling me telepathically all would be well had been a very accurate prognostication. And as to how the Bigfoot knew I was going through the dark night of the soul at the time, I do not know. But I think he could read energy from far away, and that is my only explanation for this enigmatic peculiarity. I felt comforted that the body of Mary was on our land, as it beats being buried in a graveyard or having your ashes randomly scattered in a pretty place. Furthermore, I knew the bones would serve to nourish the old oak tree, and in the last 5 years the tree had grown exponentially. I think the calcium from Mary's bones was feeding the tree. I knew she would remain safe with us. The Bigfoot stone arrangement over the grave site was always there on our property, and every year we would put flowers on the grave and say some prayers, and the following day there'd be wild flowers scattered over the grave that we knew must have been left by the Bigfoot. Me and my husband Big Bear were in regular contact with Ben Lorrington, as the story of Mary and her corpse had cemented our friendship all the more. I was never going to go to the police about this unfortunate accident, as I have heard of people being locked away for years over accidentally running someone down in the road. It happens. Accidents are a tragic part of our lives, and I understood why Ben and Violet had chosen to do what they did at the time. It would have destroyed their lives to have ended up in prison. In the same set of circumstances I might have done the same, as being locked away is no way to live. I know people who've killed a deer running into the road, so I know all too well how easy it is for accidents to happen. Once Ben Lorrington told us that the person who'd been stealing apples from their orchard over the years was in fact a Bigfoot and not Beth Sandler, whom Ben had secretly suspected was the guilty culprit all along, because she always rode past his farmhouse on her bicycle and just happened to look suitably sheepish. Big Bear decided to grow our own orchard with Ben's supervision, and 5 years later we had grown peaches, pears and apples, and we had done this more for our Bigfoot friend than for our own personal consumption. Every year when the fruit was deliciously ripe, a great deal of that fruit would mysteriously disappear, and I knew it was being taken by our Bigfoot friend, and that pleased my heart greatly. Me and my husband's encounter with the Bigfoot changed our lives, because it made us see that the world is a much more magical place than we first believed. We had not seen him again since we had unearthed Mary's grave, and I wondered privately to myself if I would ever see him again, although whenever I visited the gravesite and took a leisurely walk in the grove, I hoped that he'd show himself to me. But alas, he never did. That saddened my heart. But I knew by nature Bigfoots are elusive and reticent. I was sure he knew exactly what was going on in my life, even if I didn't know what was going on in his life. Then one day my dream of seeing him again was realized, when my 2 children who were enjoying the school holidays had told me they were going to the woodgrove to play, and they'd be back in time for tea. Lily's account, my 13-year-old daughter. I guess some people might think I'm a bit of a tomboy. I'm quite athletic and I enjoy climbing trees and playing out of doors. A lot of my friends at school are into playing on computers and stuff like that. But I personally enjoy the fresh air. My brother is also much the same as me. I think my 11-year-old brother Denny doesn't even consider me to be a girl. And I take that as a compliment because he says I'm brave and courageous, not intimidated by any challenges. Of course I like pretty things and dressing up nice, but I really like getting dirty. Playing games in the woods and climbing the old oak tree are my favourite things in the world to do. I was happy it was the school holidays, so that me and my brother Denny could scoot around our sprawling property and have so much fun together. It was a lovely summer's day, and Denny and I decided to go and climb that old oak tree in the woodgrove. The tree I'm talking about is made for climbing. It's huge, with sculptural branches that stretch up into the sky with huge hugging arms. It would be the perfect tree for a treehouse. The tree overlooks a little clearing, and on its right-hand side there's a large collection of rocks arranged together very nicely, which my mother Prim has told me not to ever disturb. Sometimes we've seen flowers on those stones. My mother says it's the grave marker of someone special that died a long time ago, and that we must not tell anybody about the grave, 'cause it's a family secret. It's good keeping secrets, 'cause I've not told anyone about the grave, nor has Denny, but then Denny's a very quiet person. My mother says he wouldn't say boo to a goose, but why would anyone want to boo a goose anyway? I know I wouldn't. It doesn't matter that Denny doesn't talk much, as I'm good at doing all the talking for the both of us. I always know what my brother is thinking, 'cause we're very close. We have an old dog called Heathcliff, who's 12 years old. He used to love running in the trees, but these days he sleeps a lot and likes to stay with my mother all the time. He's a black Labrador. We have a cat called Smudge. She's 13 years old, like me. She's often running after us in the woodgrove and likes to climb trees with us. I think she likes showing off, as she's always climbing on the highest branches that cannot support our weight, and it's like she's telling us that she's much more accomplished than we are. If I were a cat, I'd also be an agile climber. I love the woodgrove. For me and Denny, it's our secret place where we can hang about together and do all kinds of fun things. During the summer, the woodgrove is so lovely and cool, and it's just the best place to be, because the trees are like large green umbrellas above our head. I love it when a breeze is blowing, and the trees look as if they're dancing. When me and my brother Denny walked into the grove, it was pretty that day. There were ferns everywhere, furnishing the ground, along with shrubs and pretty wild flowers. There was a pretty delicate light twinkling through the boughs of the trees, and we could hear the buzz of insects, the tweets of birds that were high up in the canopy, and the whooshing sounds of the trees swinging in the breeze. I like the woodsy, earthy smell of the grove, and sometimes me and Denny scare away deer and rabbits. But curiously, the squirrels and chipmunks are always interested in us, and sometimes they even follow us into the grove by darting from one branch to another. Whenever we go to the old oak tree, we stand by the grave, where this person is so lucky to be buried in such a cool place. The grave marker is way better than those horrible granite slabs you get at a cemetery. We say our prayers for the deceased body lying under the stones, and me and Denny begin to climb the old oak tree. And then there's Smudge, who comes racing behind us, scrambling up the tree. She darts past me, inadvertently scratching my hand. I cry out in pain, snatching my hand away, loosening my grip on the branch, as a reaction to being scratched. And then I lose my grip, and I'm airborne. I go crashing to the ground, centimetres away from those rocks, and land on soft foliage with an unfortunate thump. Luckily it was not too bad a fall, but I was still crying out in pain because it was sore, and the pain was shooting through my body. Denny was peering down at me through the branches. His face paled. "Are you all right, Lily?" he called after me. I let out a whimper because the pain was fearsome. I tried to stumble to my feet, but I could barely walk. It was difficult to walk, you see. Denny said he'd go and call my mother. He ran off with Smudge running behind him, leaving me all alone in the woods. For a moment I felt very scared. I was certain somebody was watching me, but nothing was there. And then I saw him. At first I thought I was seeing something very funny, that I was dreaming. because it was a dark shadow in the woods. Then I saw it was a giant man who was covered in hair with very long arms and a very big body. But I wasn't scared because he spoke to me. He said he'd take me back home and that I would be safe. He carried me in his arms like a baby and brought me back to the house, and my mother saw the Bigfoot, that's what he's called, carrying me in his arms from the kitchen window. She opened the door to greet us. I think she was afraid that I'd been badly hurt, because I saw her face was pale. My mother said that the Bigfoot spoke to her, telling her I'd be all right. He thanked her for planting the orchards and said he loved the peaches best of all. I remember my mother saying to him, "Thank you so much for bringing her back safely." Then the hairy man put me down on the ground and he glided away. He was so nice to me. Me and my brother always hope we'll see him again. One day I pretended to fall just so he would come to my rescue, but he didn't, because I think he knew I was pretending to be hurting when I really wasn't. My brother said I was a useless actor because I couldn't convince him that I was hurt. He said my tears were not real. I told my mother and she said it was a silly thing to do because the Bigfoot is a very clever man and would know I was play acting. I know she's right about that, but my mother says that I mustn't worry because she's sure that I will see him one day again. And I think she's right, but she told me I will see him when I don't expect to see him. So there you are. That's my story.
Wow, what an incredible story. I really enjoyed that. I don't know about you. And what a turn up for the books. So that was not the body of Eliza. That was the body of a young woman called Mary, who had been buried in there because she had been run over accidentally by a car. And poor old Violet, she was so guilty about what she'd done that unfortunately she ended up getting cancer. But wasn't that an incredible story? And I do agree. Beautiful place to be buried under an old oak tree. Until next time, goodbye and good night.